some of the ideas of what we can do in terms of sensory information and perception and ways that we can use technology today to actually enhance those things. So just a quick introduction. Again, my name is Tim Cannon. I'm the CTO of a company, a startup called Grindhouse Wetware. We do open source, DIY human augmentation, low budget cybernetics research. We're hackers, biohackers they call us, or grinders. We deal a lot with body modification people simply because doctors won't talk to us. So what is a grinder? Well, a grinder comes from a graphic novel. The term comes from a graphic novel called Dr. Sleepless, where it's set in the future, and people are frustrated by the fact that they didn't get their jetpack, and they didn't get the future that Bugs Bunny cartoons promised them, and so they're frustrated, and so they take it upon themselves to start enhancing themselves, doing things in basement labs and stuff like that. And that's what I do. I do work in basement labs, hacker spaces, but it's all cybernetics type stuff, implants and devices to enhance sensory perception. So Left Anonym is one of our somewhat notorious early grinders. Oftentimes they also call us practical transhumanists because we just believe in starting to transcend some of the biological limitations of the human body today in a practical and reasonable way. So some of the things we've done, we built something called a thinking cap. We use something called transcranial direct current stimulation to invoke flow states. And that is actually defined. Flow is a mental state of operation in which a person performing an activity is fully immersed, feeling energized and focused, full involvement and enjoyment in the process or activity. In essence, flow is characterized by complete absorption in what one does. So this actually stimulates and increases it excites your neurons by putting a small amount of current across your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And this causes that brain state flow. There are also other brain states that you can achieve with this. You can actually apply this to your motor cortex, and it feels like your head is tilting from side to side. So right now we're actually trying to rig that into a flight simulator game control so that when you turn in the plane, you actually feel yourself turning. There's also cathodal stimulation. We use anodal stimulation, but cathodal stimulation can be used to actually reduce the excitability of neurons in certain parts of the brain, which can be actually good for learning rather than the flow state, which is actually good at accessing things that you've already learned. One of the things that we're working on now, here are some prototype models of a device called Circadia. This is actually the modern version. I'm getting it implanted in my forearm in a couple of months. And basically it has 8 LEDs that shine up through your skin, showing the time in binary, because I am a giant computer science nerd, so I love binary. It will also have a temperature and a heartbeats per minute sensor, which can give us real-time biological data. It's kind of quantified self made simple. It's got Bluetooth, because everything is better with Bluetooth. And also it makes it easy to get it onto the phone, and then from there you can kick it up to just about any place in the internet, of course. So that's been coming along nicely, and we're getting it encapsulated and planting it in a couple months. Bottlenose is a device that I'll probably mostly be talking about for the purpose of this presentation. That's some concept art of bottlenose. We have an actual box device that I unfortunately forgot to bring. And basically what this is I have a rare earth neodymium magnet implanted in my left ring finger. And what this does is it actually allows me to feel electrical fields, because electrical fields cause an oscillation, particularly AC, but I can also feel magnets, I can feel some DC currents. Now this kind of gives me more integration into the devices I use day to day. So for example, I can feel my laptop hard drive working. I can feel how hard my cell phone is pumping. I can feel various fields in the devices that I use. And so what we did, I got this implanted, and I went and started hunting down fields and seeing what I could see, and it was very interesting. But I said, this seems like it could be more useful. It seems like I could take this and take any sensor, even something that's well outside of the human perception range, convert that data to a feeling that's intuitive, and then understand the thresholds of the sensor that I'm using. So in an example, we took a distance sensor, rangefinder, and we converted that to frequency of oscillation so that I would feel in my finger magnet this sort of vibration, and it would get more and more frequent, so it would buzz faster as things approach the distance sensor, and it would buzz slower as things left. So then it created this effect where if I closed my eyes, I could sweep it across the room and get a sense of echolocation, which is why we call it the bottlenose. And this is a very interesting sensation because you can actually navigate a room with your eyes closed and kind of just get this map of what's going on in the room. Now, it's obviously extremely low resolution, but you can kind of detect where objects are and that sort of thing. Now, what's neat is that we're kind of borrowing from a brain structure that really already exists. You already have a sense of pressure, and it already can give you information on how much or how little. So it's already intuitive. It's already dealing with internal feelings that we understand in a much more natural way than, say, high processing cognitive information. There's just a large difference between looking at the number of meters away that something is and feeling how far away it is. So it's a very different way of sensing the world. And you can do this with any sort of sensor, so you can know how CO2 it feels in a room or how radioactive it feels in a room. And obviously there are some uses there. So my hypothesis is that we can borrow our senses to make new maps and process new information and kind of create new behaviors that we don't necessarily expect. So sensory experience, so for example, sound. Sound is just simply two vectors. Sound, you have frequency and you have amplitude. And from that, you can create tone and volume. I can also experience frequency and amplitude through my finger magnet. So I can tell the difference between a microwave running and my laptop charger. I can tell the difference between a strong signal and a weak one. And I can even feel news of difference and change in the tones in real time. So I can actually kind of feel these things going up and down, and I can get that news of difference, and it immediately maps into other pieces of my, other senses that I have, and that becomes part of my perceptual set. So, we have a lot of sensory adaptation. From my understanding, the audio cortex, for example, is not really well developed for babies. They pretty much get highs and lows, and then everything else is learned by the neurons actually creating maps, which is why people who major in music are capable of hearing differences in notes a lot better, because they've trained that particular part of their brain to actually function at a higher level and pick out those differences better. So you have bottom-up sensory into your perceptual set. You have a bottom-up kind of method where your senses make you aware of something, and then it becomes part of something that you can cognitively react to. So if you smell something bad, you can start to kind of suss out what that means. But before you really recognize what it is or what the ramifications of it are, you just really kind of immediately recognize, this is bad. I should probably figure this out. And so you have bottom-up adaptation where senses bubble things up, and then we can start to learn to find them, and we can start to learn to pick them out of sensory signals. Now you also have a top-down, which is kind of like the music major, where you have something that's part of your set, your perceptual set, or you're made aware of something on an intellectual level, I should say. And then you start to request that your senses poll for this particular data. And when you have a top-down kind of experience, sometimes, I mean, there are limits. There's limits to the human body. But if you have devices that don't have any such limitations, the question is, what couldn't you perceive? And how would that affect your day-to-day life and your day-to-day behavior? If you have accurate data information as well on things that you normally couldn't get, you'd have to get them from your cognitive set. So everybody in here knows what instinct is, so I'm not going to repeat the definition, but just something to be made aware of. 90% of the time you're not really aware of your sense of smell, for example, and you have instinctual behaviors and you have instinctual kind of feelings, and these feelings are, in my opinion, far more impressive to the human being than facts are. Facts tend to be something that we choose, whereas feelings are something that we don't necessarily choose. And an example of this is if you come to be intellectually convinced of something, you may actually feel kind of bizarre about expressing that opinion if it's contrary to what you believed before. So for example, I've recently changed my opinion on gun control. And so for years I was raised in a house that was really Second Amendment down your throat, so on and so forth. And I like guns. I think they're fun. I was in the Army, that sort of thing. So, but I watched a couple of things. The Daily Show had an amazing piece on gun control in Australia. I've come to change my opinion, but it's odd. I feel dirty when I say that I believe in gun control because I spent so much time believing in that. And so even though the facts are there, I don't feel good about those facts. And so for some reason it's causing this conflict. Feeling good about the facts you pick, I would say, are more important than the actual facts, because if you don't feel good about them, a lot of times you won't express them. You might have solid evidence that something that you believe is wrong, but you'll choose to ignore those facts, whereas you won't choose to ignore your feelings. You can't choose to ignore your feelings. So what I'm suggesting, and what I'd like to see, as far as kind of, and I think I'm going really quick here, so I hope you guys have a lot of questions. Anyway, what I would like to see is the use of data mashups and then pump them into the natural senses that people have so that they can correct their behaviors in an appropriate way. So, for example, you may feel like you're in danger in some part of town because you have, say, natural prejudices. However, if you have something pumping into you that actually gives you the crime rates of the area that you're in, you actually have a natural feeling as to whether that is prejudice or whether you're actually in a high crime area. And so that sort of disparity can then call to the attention of the person, I'm not. This is not me. I have something wrong with the way I'm perceiving the world. There's something wrong here. And the problem is we have this neofrontal cortex, which is an amazing, amazing machine for predicting things poorly. So we tend to think that and worse than that is that you have this conscious experience that's perpetually convincing you that whatever your neofrontal cortex delivers, it's got to be right. There was an experiment done where people were taken in a couple of days after the Challenger shuttle blew up, which you guys might not know about or remember, but when the Challenger shuttle blew up, they took people in and they said, what were you doing that day? And then they brought them back in 2 years later and they said, what were you doing that day? Now, they were studying a known phenomenon where memory degrades. But what was surprising about the study was when they asked them, why is there a disparity in your two stories? They said, I don't know why I would have lied back then. Now that doesn't make any sense. They thought that the original story they told was the dishonest version because they were so sure that the present moment was correct that they couldn't acknowledge this fact. There was a cognitive dissonance that took hold. And so what I seek to do with some of this stuff that I'm trying to do is to attempt to kind of make that more in your face and more perpetual so that you're constantly at odds with your cognitive dissonance and you can start to rely on data and rely on facts, because in the world that we live in, feelings just aren't nearly as useful as they were on the African savannah. They're just not, they're not as useful because we can't predict things well. So one of the suggested ways, of course, I just went over was behavior correction. And so my generic idea is to say, have 10 magnets in my finger, right? And a glove that basically gives me 10 different data vectors. And so over time of use of this, I'll have a general feeling of what tune I'm in. So I'll have weather and crime rates and smog rates and where the nearest Wi-Fi station is, and whether or not I'm in a country that's going to arrest me for speaking freely or being the asshole I am. What is, and then that it becomes a natural feeling, something that is unquestionable. So when you start to feel like you're in danger, or it starts to feel like the weather's coming in, or something like that, you know how to react appropriately, and you're going with real data, not just these kind of hazy feelings which could easily be influenced by prejudice or some sort of other misperception, data, corruption from just the brain being what it is. So another idea that I'd had with this 10 magnet interface was the idea of kind of, and it doesn't have to be magnets, you can do this easily with a vibrating motor that goes in intensity or whatever. You won't get the kind of resolution that I get, but when it's in your body, you actually I can feel fields like really, really far out and things like that. But yeah, for compatibility, I basically had the idea where, for example, if you did some sort of like speed dating thing, I think that would trim a whole lot out of the need to get to know you, to get to know me, because if you guys sit down together and you can feel where you're in tune, and you know what your last girlfriend was like, and you know what the girlfriend before her was like, and man, every time they're like that, you definitely want to go the other direction, run far and fast. Empathy is another one. Being able to come into contact with somebody and immediately know various factors like stress, mood level, those sorts of things, even getting biological data so that you have a generic understanding of how that person is feeling. And there are ways in which you could then, I think it would at least direct you to attempt to empathize with somebody a little more, because a lot of people put on the stoic mask, a lot of people put on the face and say, I'm happy, when really all they want is for somebody to just say, no, how are you doing? Like, really, how are you doing? And a lot of times you can't make that determination, and it's almost offensive to some people to make that determination. But when you have real data that they can't deny, and you look at them and say, look, Steve, I know you're hurting. I know it. I can feel it. At that point, I think that you can be directed to empathize more with people. So basically, these technologies that are coming out of hacker spaces and coming out of basement labs and things like this are actually at the forefront of these sorts of things, simply because there are a lot of restrictions that go into academic research. There's a lot of restrictions that go into corporate research. There's a lot of issues like that people have in pushing this stuff forward. Like I said, doctors won't talk to us, that sort of thing. But when it's us in the basement with stuff that we can use, me and my buddy say, we should convene an ethics panel. You think this is ethical? Yeah, me too, let's go. Yeah, anyway. So other people that are experimenting, obviously Grindhouse Wetware is experimenting. There's a fellow named Neil Harbison who's a pretty interesting guy. I don't know if anybody's heard of this guy. He invented a device called iBoard, and it's a head-mounted camera. He is severely colorblind. I think it's called somochromatic, and he's severely colorblind. And so he has this head-mounted camera, and whatever it's pointing at, it converts that color into a particular tone. Things on the higher color range, like on the blue spectrum, are higher frequencies, lower frequencies for deeper colors. And he's actually able to perceive colors that humans can't. He's actually able to perceive colors higher than what the human eye can perceive through his audio cortex, because the range is better, and it's more geared towards putting the right data in the right place. Biohack.me is a group of really cool biohackers, tinkerers. It's one of the places to go to get involved in a lot of discussions when it comes to biohacking and DIY, practical transhumanism, these sorts of things. Here in DC, on Thursday nights, they do a grinder night. It's at the Hack DC, the DC Hackerspace. Does Thursday nights as Grind DC, and it's all about biohacking and building cybernetics and that sort of stuff. There's also a professor out in England named Kevin Warwick. He's done a couple of TED Talks, and he's a really interesting fellow. He's done a lot of like really avant-garde research and things like that, and really taken it far. He made a joke about how he was getting a finger magnet implant for one of his students, and he just thought it was completely silly because you got a campus full of would-be surgeons and people who are brilliant, and he had to go to some piercer, and on the ethics forms he had to write Dr. Evil was the guy doing the procedure, because the piercer, he went by the name Dr. Evil. And so it's kind of ridiculous, the restrictions that go into that. And that's why people like me are actually kind of starting to outpace business and academia, is simply because we're taking a different road. And we don't have to ask permission. And besides, I'd rather beg forgiveness than ask permission. Okay, well, that went way too fast, I think. And so I guess we'll just open things up to questions and talk. And then if not, you guys don't have to listen to me anymore. What's up?
I'm curious as to how a magnet in your finger can translate into a distance sensor.
So, what we do is we actually created a device that it fits into a glove like that concept art, and basically it has a distance sensor on it that we pump through a microcontroller with a little bit of code, and then just convert it into an electromagnet that sits right over the magnet interface for the finger, right? So, so that ends up being how we translate it. And then, obviously, extending that idea, from there, you can put any sensor in place, and as long as you know how to translate the data, you're good. You had your hand up.
Would the magnet also be bad for like your computer and stuff like that? Because I heard like magnets are good for other electronics.
It's actually, the magnet is so small that it very rarely affects anything. However, one caveat, I have a buddy in New York who has the biggest finger magnet implants in the world right now, and he has a Mac, and the Mac has a magnet thing that tells it when to go to sleep, and so he'll just be sitting there working, all of a sudden, chat! He shut his computer down, and so there are some things you have to get used to. Yeah?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So like you said something about you can have all these magnets in your fingers and one like the weather and all that. How would you what would the magnet?
Well, basically that's what we would do with the device. So it would be like a small device, basically like almost like a glove or something like really thin that you could like fit over your fingers and that sort of thing. And we have some concepts for making it as lightweight as possible, which you can make this pretty lightweight. And so then you just have a range of sensors. I mean, you could even borrow sensory data from your cell phone, so it could give you like maybe a GPS of how far you are away from your house and maybe what direction it is or something like that. Just all sorts of things that you can take. So anything that you could sense electromechanically or otherwise, you could then pump into this and get a natural understanding for what that is. Yeah.
Can you explain the part again about being able to feel more empathetic?
Yeah, so basically, I guess you would feel you would feel that person, and like say you have these 10 vectors of data, so some sort of biological data mashup that kind of says, on this finger I'm kind of getting mood data, on this finger I'm getting kind of health data, on this finger I'm getting whatever. And so if you approach, say, your dad, and he looks preoccupied, and all of a sudden your finger just like dips down really low, like, Pops, what's wrong? You okay? So it can actually direct you to be more empathic simply because they can't help but give you that data. There's no amount of masking or acting that will be able to hide that, unless of course they choose to hide. Right. You.
So I understand the benefits of empathizing with the others, but wouldn't some people view that as an invasion of privacy? Because, as you said, they put on this stoic face and they don't want people to know, like, you know, oh, I just broke up with my girlfriend or something like that. So.
Well, I think some people would probably want to hide it, just like some people want to hide now. However, I also think that there are some people who don't want to hide, but do. And I think that those people would be the people who would benefit from that. I mean, but then again, at the same time, just on a side note, you know, privacy is going the way of the buffalo, so everybody can get used to that.
Alright, so the way, so the things you're picking up from the empathy thing, are you picking up like biological chemicals that are releasing?
No, I mean it would have to be like kind of a mutually agreed upon thing. So, you know, they're wearing one, you're wearing one, and then maybe your left hand corresponds to that person and your data corresponds to you, so that you have like a disparity between you and them or something like that. And then they would have the same system transmitting usually.
So how does the signal from the brain that's carrying emotion go down, back down?
Well, now that would be the more complicated part. Now, I was actually I was telling him earlier before the talk. We built that device thinking app that does the cranial simulation. Well, that in and of itself, we were trying to add a low resolution EEG as well, so that you basically have in your actual headwear, you have something that's kind of reading your brain signals and kind of maybe interpreting that data as needed. Okay, she had a question, and then you had a question, and then you had a question. So, do you want to go first?
Let me just follow up on that. So there's code right now on GitHub which takes webcam data, and it's so high resolution, current webcams, that it then sees, it can interpret the pulse rate from that photo. So you basically, you're looking into a webcam, talking to a webcam, the webcam decodes that information, finds your face, and then finds where the blood vessels are underneath the surface of your face, and then can find out when your heart is beating. And so then that's a poor proxy for emotion, but that data already exists, and that's publicly available. So if you just had a camera on your side that would decode where someone's face is, then decode what their heart rate is, you can see their heart rate elevating, that gives you a very poor proxy for empathy, but that data already exists, and that technology is already here as we speak.
Well, and then the device that I'm implanting in my arm is actually going to be transmitting that data to my phone pretty much perpetually. So I have heartbeats per minute, temperature. If we can get blood pressure, I mean, that's the three. That's the diagnostic. That's what they use to check everybody. So you can really truly get a sense of health and that sort of thing. And then, like he said, all of a sudden your heart rate spikes. You know, maybe that's an indication of something. You know, so on and so forth. And you can get warning signals and stuff like that. You know, hey, you've been tachycardic for a long time. Either you're on a whole lot of cocaine or you need to go to the doctor. Okay, so you back there.
Oh, I had the same question as him actually, so you already answered it.
Okay. Somebody else had a question.
How many things do you actually have like implants in you right now?
Oh, currently I only have the one finger magnet. My buddy has, a bunch of us have two. But yeah, no, I mean, and I'm no stranger to body modification. I used to be like a human pincushion type of guy and that sort of thing. So tons of piercings, mohawk, you know, obviously needed a hug kind of guy. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing that I'm quite blasé about, simply because I'm from that kind of culture where it's like, well, just, cut it, stick it in there, it's cool. Tattoo gun, guitar string, it's awesome. So.
Do you guys do all the modifications yourself?
We have a piercer that we go through. Yeah. So. Yeah. I thought so too. You know what I mean? I'd love it to be in a doctor's office. You know what I mean? Where people standing by. But unfortunately for me, curiosity trumps safety. What up?
I was just thinking one more thing about the amplifications. I think they're, to go through any sort of process to add yourself this thing, it would have huge issues going public, but I think you might maybe like watch this, but it could have really great applications in like therapy or at a
Yes.
mental hospital, or like some situation where you're
Oh,
consenting.
wow, yeah. Yeah, good thinking. Yeah, no, right, where you're in control of it, right? Yeah, I like that.
Might be able to get a
Absolutely, but
product.
everything, by the way, everything we do is open source. So we don't close source on anything, we tell everybody the secret sauce, we give away the schematics. It's just, we're not, I'm of the opinion that closing source and closing innovation just stifles everybody. I just can't even imagine what would have happened if somebody would have had the foresight to patent the if statement. You know what I mean? Like, there would just be no program, we wouldn't have the internet.
So, you can detect with magnetic fields.
Yeah.
So, I'm just curious, how's that possible?
Well, actually, I can show you if you'd like. Does anybody have a laptop that's being powered right now? No? Okay, hold on 1 second. I can show you actually how this feels. I brought a magnet, and people can actually feel what it feels like in my skin if they so desire. So, I should come on up here, Chief. So, let me just go down. Alright, grab this, alright, and just put it right about there. Feel that? Okay, so that's what I feel inside my finger, only at a much higher resolution, because you're not augmented, you're just on. So, I mean, it sticks to my finger, and stuff like that. That's weird. All right, any other? You?
Do you think there are any long-term negative consequences of putting these things in your body?
Maybe. I'm gonna find out. So,
Not an issue with like pain control, as in like if you have these feelings constantly there, kind of what does it like I'm sure you guys have but obviously I thought have you found
sure I did.
Right.
Yeah,
I hope I know.
totally did.
Have you found anything that like is surprisingly like sensitive or
Hard drive magnets.
yeah.
Man, I'll tell you what, you guys think they're just a mundane piece of metal. They're scary, they got all kinds of wicked sorcery in there. Just you really have a feel for the raw force of nature that is magnetism when you touch one of these things with your finger. I mean, it's no joke. Like at my hackerspace, people will see me walking by and they'll throw a hard drive magnet at you and be like, great! And it's sort of, like I run away like a sissy girl. All right, so, what up?
So I'm a little confused about how the magnet translates into neural signals that you can actually understand. So is it literally just a wave that
Yes, okay, and again, you get frequency and amplitude. So
so that goes into your brain and you can
right, just like any other sense, right? It's the exact, as a matter of fact, that's what I mean when I say I'm borrowing a sense and then creating a new map. And an example of this, I guess I was wanting to kind of mention, and I'd forgotten to, basically in terms of bottom-up processing, right? When I was working in my lab one day, I went to go grab a resistor, and I had to cross my hand over top of this soldering station. And a soldering station consumes a decent amount of power. And so when I put my hand over it, I recoiled really quickly. And then I realized what I was doing. So it was somewhere along the line, this actually started to become an instinct rather than cognitive. Does that make sense? So it wasn't like I got my hand in that field and went, wow, this is a really highly oscillating field that feels pretty strong, which probably means there's a lot of electricity around here somewhere and I should get my hand out. It was, as soon as I went in, I recoiled, and then I realized what I was doing. So I actually kind of created this new instinct. Well, I didn't create it, I didn't do anything, it happened. And I don't really exactly know how, but so when you're talking about the brain and how it interprets stimulus, right, you can actually kind of, all of a sudden these things sort of just naturally happen, and you start to borrow the existing structures there and teach them how to listen for this particular type of stimulus and then it kind of starts to become second nature.
So does it turn like a vibration into an action potential, or like neurally? Is
Oh,
that-
on a neural level, it's entering through the same place that your sense of touch and pressure enters through. So
Okay.
you're actually agitating the nerves. The reason we picked the finger was because it's one of the highest concentrations of nerves, which, as you can imagine, also means that it was an extremely painful thing to do because you don't get anesthetic. I mean, you got to do it raw. And so, you know, you do something like that, and I mean, it really hurts. But then after it heals, you have such a level of sensitivity. At least for me, it was worth it. Kind of unlocking that. I mean, I gave myself another sense. You know, I can smell magnetism now. I can, you know, it's weird. I mean, it's strange. It's like implanted an artificial sensory organ in my body. Okay?
For like the future, when you have the arm implant, how are you going? Like, do you have a medical note for like, airports and stuff? Like, how do you?
No. I just kind of, I imagine that I'm basically just going to get put on a bunch of watch lists and get hassled everywhere I go and start getting used to trains. You know, because, you know, I mean, they're just, nobody's going to see a bunch of circuitry implanted in a guy's arm these days and think, oh, he's a scientist. No, I'm clearly a job.
So maybe, oh, go ahead.
How big is the magnet?
It's 3 millimeters by 500 micrometers.
So very nice.
Yeah.
So how much does, like, these magnets, how much does it cost? Because, like, imagine you guys are funding it yourselves.
Yeah, we're completely self-funded, which is awesome. Yeah, the magnets actually are really cheap because the ones we use are actually used for, they're magnetic stirrers, but they're coated in a biologically inert substance, which allows them to be implanted. And so those are actually like 100 for $50 or something like that. But then to get somebody with the skill to implant them, unless you want to do it yourself, which I would not ever recommend to anybody, but know a couple people who did. But yeah, that can sometimes run you just regular piercer prices or regular like extreme body modification. You know, if you wanted to get your tongue split or something wacky like that, you know what I mean. You're gonna pay a little bit extra, but it's mostly body modification prices.
So maybe you could speak about kind of the separate silos. There's kind of a research silo. So there's research on this, using direct current stimulation. But there's also the silos of this DIY ethic. And so maybe you could talk about the different silos and maybe the interaction between the silos.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's, actually it was weird. I actually got an opportunity the other day. A business was actually looking to outsource its R&D to a hackerspace, which I was really surprised to hear that because typically there is a little bit of a rift there between academia and a lot of academics are frustrated by the binding of that sort of thing. So then they go to these hackerspaces with their knowledge and they're kind of unbounded. And so the research, but also what's great is that in the hacker spaces, the research is completely publicly available. I mean, most people in hacker spaces are really open source enthusiasts, and they're really into open science and that sort of thing. There are a couple of publication places for people who are doing what they call citizen science, and where they can get peer reviewed and where they can get their research actually, you know, taken seriously and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, so you basically have these hackers who are doing phenomenal research, and they're trying to kind of get it recognized, but of course, you know, it's outside of a lab, so you have kind of issues there where they say, well, you could have had contamination and so on and so forth, but the research is good for us, so we continue to build off of it. So I think you have like kind of a small, you know, back alley deal between particularly academics and hackers, where it's kind of, you know, don't put my name on it because I could get in trouble, but yeah, this is totally what you need to do. And but business, on the other hand, which is the other silo of R&D, you know, obviously they try to keep all their stuff typically closed up and that sort of thing, and they're more in it for a profit, whereas typically academics and hackers are not in it for a profit, they're in it because they're fascinated. And that's one thing that I really do appreciate about the hacker spaces, is that I'm not, I didn't go to any notable university. I went to a 2-year tech school. I dropped out of high school. Went on adventures. Joined the army. You know what I mean? Like traveled around. Just kind of that sort of thing. And so, but I always managed to learn, and I always managed to be able to keep pace with people. And so it's really nice to be in a place where you can do research and be taken seriously without anybody ever asking you to see your degree or your diploma or what qualifies you, because what qualifies you is that you're interested and willing to help. And that's what I tend to prefer about the hacker mentality. You get these hacker spaces together, they do amazing things, high altitude balloons, really complex systems where the environment is reacting to people and that sort of stuff. I mean, really cutting edge things. And it's all done by people who are like, oh yeah, I'm a barber and I make cybernetics. You know what I mean? Or, these sorts of things. And a lot of people are scared by that, but I tend to remind them that, the Wright brothers were bicycle salesmen. So, yeah.
Like, when you're making these things, like, for, like, the magnet, did you, like, do something to the magnet, or you literally just put, like, the
Well,
magnet?
it comes coated in a substance that makes it so that it won't, make you die. So that's good. Now, there are some people in the biohacking community who've actually coated their own magnets and installed their own magnets. And that was, I had one guy in my group that did it, and it was met with disaster. The coating breached, and then, I don't want to freak you out, but yeah, rust starts to come into the skin and get heavy metal poisoning, and you have to get horrible procedures to get it all straightened out.
So the chip that you put into that can detect pulse and oxygen. How does it detect?
It's not pulse, it's pulse and temperature.
Okay.
Pulse and temperature. The pulse is actually very similar to what he was talking about. What it does is it shines a light down through blood vessels, and then basically does a differential, because it figures out the difference between, because when you pump fully, the light that, let me say that. It shines a light down through and then reads the light that it reflects, right? And so then it's like looking for differences in the light that comes back, because when your heart pumps blood in, it's more opaque and that sort of thing. So it basically gauges those differences and creates a beat based on that. And and obviously there can be false positives, so there's algorithms in there to smooth it out and correct it and that sort of thing, so that it basically just returns a number.
Does it use like a battery or like?
Yeah.
So what if you like replace the battery?
Oh, it charges wirelessly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's got like a coil that I put near the surface of the skin. So.
And like you would have to replace the lights or anything?
Well, LEDs. If you run them within spec, I don't even know that you can burn them out. You wouldn't need to replace. This is kind of to prove a point. So it'll probably be in me for about 6 months, and then we're going to improve the hell out of it, and it's going to do all kinds of wacky, awesome new stuff, and I'm going to be like, okay, time for a replacement. But I think that I think people are going to eventually need to get immersed in the idea that their bodies are going to become quite modular, and that you're going to be doing this sort of stuff and replacing this sort of stuff on a semi-regular basis as technology moves forward. We are going to integrate with our machines more tightly. We already are. We have been trying to do that since we invented machines. It was our first order of business. So if you don't think that humanity's trajectory is to end up brain in a jar living on a computer, I would like to disagree. So, but yeah. So.
Like, why don't doctors want anything to do with this? Like, I feel like this would be, like, really smart.
Yeah, me too. We have this society that's really suit happy, and doctors spend a lot of money getting a piece of paper that, makes them a lot of money, which then gets them a lot of crap, and it's not like, the average doctor that comes home and says, hey honey, I'm going to totally take a risk on this experimental procedure that could lose us everything we've earned. It's just not going to go over well, and that generally is the idea. If a doctor participates in this, he's participating outside of ethical, what they consider to be ethical, parameters, and so they will lose their license and get crushed by these horrible government institutions that require bribes in order to get research through. So, if you can not tell, I'm a little disgruntled by the FDA. I don't know if that's coming through very clearly. We good?
Okay, we're good.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.